The twin suns of Calderis blazed mercilessly overhead as Haidar Marwan adjusted the worn leather straps of his supply cart. The desert wind carried the familiar scent of baked sand and the musk of their sand-strider beasts, two massive four-legged reptiles whose broad, splayed feet were perfectly adapted for traversing the endless dunes. At 43 years of age, Haidar had spent more than half his life crossing these wastes, trading between the scattered settlements that dotted the feudal world's harsh landscape. "Father, the water barrels are secured, and I've checked the axles twice," called his son Kai, a lean youth of 16 summers with the same dark hair and weathered features that marked him as desert-born. The boy's crossbow hung across his back, its wooden stock carved with protective symbols their people had used for generations. Haidar nodded approvingly, his hand instinctively touching the curved scimitar at his side. The blade had been his father's, and his father's before that, forged in the manner of their ancestors from the finest steel their smiths could produce. Its edge gleamed despite its age, a testament to the care with which it had been maintained across the generations. "Good lad, the oasis of Kharan is 3 days' journey, and the desert spirits have been restless of late." Haidar's voice carried the gravelly tone of a man who had breathed sand and sun for decades. "Keep your eyes sharp for anything unusual. The traders from the eastern settlements speak of strange omens." They began their journey as the first sun reached its zenith, their sandstriders plodding steadily across the shifting dunes. The great beasts moved with the patient rhythm of creatures born to the desert, their thick, scaled hides providing protection from both the sun's rays and the occasional sandstorm. Behind them, the wooden cart creaked and groaned under its load of trade goods, mining tools, and precious water. As they traveled, Haidar found himself thinking of the stories his own father had told him, tales of the time before the current age, when the Sky Warriors had come to Calderis to drive back the star demons. Those were legends now, passed down through generations of desert dwellers who had little understanding of the greater galaxy beyond their world's harsh embrace. To them, the Emperor was a distant god, whose servants sometimes descended from the heavens to protect the faithful. The first day passed without incident, the monotonous landscape of sand and stone, broken only by the occasional rocky outcropping or the bleached bones of some long-dead creature. As evening approached, they made camp in the lee of a weathered mesa, building a small fire from dried dung and the twisted roots of desert shrubs. "Tell me again about the old times, father," Kai said as they shared their simple meal of dried meat and flat bread. "About the Sky Warriors and their great battles." Haidar smiled, remembering his own youth and the same fascination with the ancient stories. "Long ago, when the stars were young and our world was even harsher than it is now, there came a time of great darkness. The desert spirits themselves were corrupted by entities from beyond the veil of reality, beings of such malevolence that they sought to twist all life to their will." The older man's voice took on the cadence of the traditional telling, words passed down through countless generations around countless fires. The people of Calderis were strong, but they were not strong enough to face such evil alone. So the Emperor, blessed be his name, sent his greatest warriors to our world. They wore armor the color of blood and bore upon their shoulders the symbol of the raven. With weapons that spoke thunder and blades that could cleave stone, they purged the corruption from our lands. Kai listened with rapt attention, as he always did, though he had heard the story countless times. "And they still watch over us, so the priests say, my son. Though we may go years without seeing them, they remain vigilant. The Emperor protects those who remain faithful and pure of heart." Haidar's expression grew serious, "Which is why we must always be watchful for signs of corruption. The old evil never truly dies. It merely waits for moments of weakness to resurface." The second day brought them into more broken terrain, where ancient lava flows had created a landscape of twisted rock formations and deep canyons. The sandstriders navigated the rough ground with surprising grace, their multiple legs providing stability on the uneven surface. It was in this region that they encountered their first sign of trouble. "Father, look there," Kai pointed to a cluster of rocks ahead. "Those markings." Haidar squinted against the glare of the twin suns and felt his blood run cold. Carved into the stone were symbols that had no place in the natural world, 8-pointed stars that strained his vision. The markings were fresh, cut deep into the rock with tools or claws. Chaos sigils, he whispered, using the forbidden word that few on their world dared to speak aloud. Someone has been here recently, and they were not faithful servants of the Emperor. They pressed on, but with increased caution. Haidar's hand never strayed far from his scimitar's hilt. The very air seemed to grow heavier as they travelled, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. By the third day, they could see the palm trees of the oasis of Karan rising from the shimmering heat haze. But something was wrong. The trees, which should have been green and lush, appeared withered and twisted. The normal sounds of settlement life, the voices of children playing and merchants haggling, were absent. "Father, I don't like this," Kai whispered as they approached the settlement's outskirts. "The silence is unnatural," Haidar nodded grimly. "Stay close, boy. Keep your weapon ready, but do not loose unless I give the word or your life depends on it." The oasis of Karan had been a thriving community of perhaps 300 souls when last they had visited, 6 months prior. Now, as they entered the settlement, they found it transformed into something from their worst nightmares. The buildings, constructed in the traditional style with thick stone walls and flat roofs, were covered in the same blasphemous symbols they had seen carved into the rocks. But these were not merely carved. They seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light that made the shadows dance in unnatural ways. The central well, once the pride of the settlement and the source of its prosperity, now bubbled with black, oily liquid that moved with a purpose all its own. The palm trees surrounding it had grown into impossible configurations, their fronds twisted into geometric patterns that defied nature's laws. A purple-green energy crackled between the corrupted vegetation, and the very air tasted of copper and decay. "By the throne," Haidar breathed, invoking the Emperor's name as a ward against evil. As if summoned by his words, figures began to emerge from the corrupted buildings. At first glance, they appeared to be the settlers Haidar had known and traded with for years. But as they drew closer, the horrible truth became apparent. These were no longer fully human. The corruption had worked its foul changes upon them. Some bore extra limbs that ended in claws or grasping tentacles. Others had eyes that glowed with unnatural fire or skin that had taken on a metallic sheen. One figure that once had been Merchant Talmir now had a face split by a vertical mouth lined with needle-sharp teeth. Another, the settlement's waterkeeper, moved with a skittering gait on additional legs. "The faithful shall be rewarded," one of the corrupted called out, its voice a harmony of human speech and something else entirely. "Join us, travelers. Embrace the gifts of the dark gods." "Father," Kai's voice cracked with fear and revulsion. "Hold fast, my son," Haidar replied, drawing his scimitar. The ancient steel sang as it cleared its sheath, and the blade seemed to gleam with inner light in the presence of such corruption. "Remember your training. Remember your faith. The Emperor protects." The cultists, for that is what they had become, advanced with the unnatural coordination of beings linked by dark purpose. Some wielded farming tools that had been twisted into weapons of torture and pain. Others bore limbs that had once been human, but were now something far more terrible. Haidar met their advance with the fury of the righteous, his scimitar slicing deadly arcs through the air, each stroke guided by decades of experience and the desperate love of a father protecting his son. The blade bit deep into corrupted flesh, and where it cut, the wounds made the creatures shriek in agony. Beside him, Kai's crossbow thrummed as he sent bolt after bolt into the advancing horde. The boy had learned his lessons well, each shot finding its mark. But for every cultist they felled, 2 more seemed to take its place, emerging from the shadows of the corrupted settlement. "There are too many," Kai called out, his voice tight with strain as he reloaded his crossbow. "Then we shall send as many as we can to face the Emperor's judgment," Haidar replied, his scimitar taking the head from a creature that had once been a woman but now bore the scaled hide and forked tongue of a serpent. The battle raged through the settlement's twisted streets. Father and son fought back to back, their movements coordinated by years of traveling together through the dangerous desert. Hydar's blade work was a thing of beauty, each cut precise and economical, wasting no motion or energy. The very ground beneath their feet began to pulse with unholy life. Some of the cultists began to change further, their forms becoming even more nightmarish as the dark powers rewarded their service with additional mutations. "We cannot hold this position much longer," Hydar gasped, his scimitar dripping with blood of the fallen. "We must reach higher ground." They fought their way toward the settlement's shrine, a small stone building that had once housed a statue of the emperor but now showed signs of desecration. The eight-pointed star had been carved into its walls, but the symbol seemed somehow less stable here, as if the sacred nature of the place resisted the corruption. Inside the shrine, they found temporary respite. The cultists seemed reluctant to enter the sacred space, though whether from some remaining vestige of their former faith or because the corruption had not yet fully claimed the building, Hydar could not say. "Father, your arm," Kai pointed to where one of the cultists had managed to land a glancing blow. Dark blood seeped through the torn fabric of Hydar's robes. "It's nothing, boy. Just a scratch." But even as he spoke, Hydar could feel an unnatural burning where the claws had touched him. The corruption was trying to take hold, to work its changes upon his flesh. He gritted his teeth and pressed his hand to the wound, calling upon every prayer he had ever learned. "Emperor, blessed be your name. Grant your servant the strength to resist the temptations of darkness. Let your light burn away the shadow that seeks to claim me." The burning sensation lessened, though it did not disappear entirely. Hydar knew that if they did not escape soon, the corruption would overcome even his faith. Outside, the cultists had begun to chant in a language Hydar didn't recognize. Their voices made the very stones of the shrine tremble. "Don't listen to them," Hydar warned his son. "Cover your ears if you must. Their words are poison to the soul." But even as he spoke, he could see the changes beginning to affect the world around them. The desert itself was being transformed by the ritual. The sand began to shift and move in patterns that spelled out blasphemous words. The very air shimmered with possibility, as if reality itself was becoming malleable. "Father, look," Kai pointed to the horizon, where a new sound could be heard above the cultists' chanting. It was a deep, rhythmic thumping that seemed to come from the sky itself. Hydar's heart leaped with hope. The Emperor's warriors have come. The approaching vessel was massive, its hull scarred and painted in a deep red with a large black raven with a single teardrop of blood in the middle. It descended from the sky like a falling star, engines screaming in defiance at the corrupted world below. The cultists' chanting faltered as the ship landed with earth-shaking thuds just beyond the settlement's boundaries. Then a giant ramp dropped, and the Emperor's angels emerged. They were giants among men, each one standing nearly 8 feet tall in massive armor. The armor plates were painted in a deep red, marked with the same symbol as the ship. Their weapons were like nothing Hydar had witnessed before. He stared at the approaching figures in bewildered awe. The leader had no helmet, and a face marked by scarification with eyes that burned with righteous fury. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of one who had fought in the Emperor's name across 1,000 worlds. "I am Sergeant Celestino of the Blood Raven's 3rd Company. By the authority of the Emperor of mankind, this settlement is declared tainted beyond redemption. All who have embraced the darkness shall be purged." The cultists' chanting turned to screams of rage and terror as they charged. The weapons of the Emperor's chosen spoke thunder, as the heretics exploded in fountains of tainted flesh and bones. Steel-toothed swords revved to life, their whirring teeth making short work of any corrupted who managed to get too close. As the warriors purged the settlement, the very ground began to crack and bleed. Tentacles of impossible size erupted from beneath the sand, and the air itself seemed to tear as something vast and terrible attempted to push through from the immaterium. "Demon manifestation," Sergeant Celestino's voice cut through the violence. "Form up, do not let it fully emerge." The battle that followed was beyond anything Hydar had ever witnessed. The holy warriors fought with a coordination and ferocity that spoke of centuries of experience. The weapons carved through demonic flesh, each shot and stroke guided by tactical genius and unwavering faith. But the demon was powerful, fed by the corruption of an entire settlement, and the ritual sacrifices that had been made in its name. It lashed out with appendages that defied description, each strike capable of shattering stone and rending metal. "Father, we should help them," Kai said, his young face set with determination. "No, boy, this is not our fight. We are but mortals, and they are the Emperor's chosen. Our duty is to bear witness and to remember." Haidar's voice was filled with awe and reverence as he watched the battle. The Space Marines deployed weapons that Haidar had no names for. Some projected burning light, and others he struggled to even comprehend. Gradually, the demon's manifestation began to weaken, its hold on reality loosening as the corruption that had summoned it was systematically destroyed. With a final, reality-splitting shriek, the demon was banished back to the warp, its physical form dissolving into nothingness. The corrupted settlement began to burn as their saviors applied flame to every tainted surface, the purifying fire consuming the blasphemous symbols and corrupted vegetation alike. Sergeant Celestino approached the shrine where Haidar and Kai had taken shelter, his massive form casting a shadow over the father and son. Up close, he was even more impressive, his armor bearing the scars of countless battles. "You are the traitor Haidar Marwan," the sergeant said, his voice carrying supreme authority. "Your name is known to us. The Administratum records speak of your service to the Imperium." Haidar bowed low, pulling his son down beside him. "My lord, we are honored by your presence. We came here to trade, not knowing of the corruption that had claimed this place. Rise, faithful servant, your actions here have been observed. You and your son fought well against the forces of darkness." The sergeant's scarred face showed what might have been approval. "But you have been touched by the corruption. Show me your wound." Haidar reluctantly extended his arm where the cultist's claws had left their mark. The flesh around the wound had begun to take on an unnatural hue, and strange patterns were beginning to emerge beneath the skin. Sergeant Celestino examined the wound with the practiced eye of one who had seen corruption in all its forms. "The taint runs deep, but it has not yet claimed your soul. You are strong in faith, but without treatment you will fall to the darkness within the day." The Space Marine produced a device. He pressed it against the wound, and Haidar gasped as purifying fire raced through his veins. The corruption fought back, sending waves of agony through his body, but the Emperor's blessing proved stronger. "The immediate danger is past," Sergeant Celestino announced. "But you must be monitored. The Administratum outpost at Canyon's Edge has the facilities to ensure the taint does not return." "My lord, what of the other settlements? Are they safe?" Haidar asked, his trader's instincts making him think of the other communities scattered across the desert. "That is not your concern. The Blood Ravens will do what must be done. Your duty is to survive and to spread word of what you have witnessed here. Let it be known that the Emperor's wrath falls upon those who turn from the light." As the Space Marines prepared to depart, their work of purification complete, Sergeant Celestino turned back to Haidar and Kai. "You have been tested this day and found worthy. Remember what you have seen. The galaxy is vast and filled with terrors, but the Emperor protects those who remain faithful." The ships lifted off with the same thunderous roar that had announced their arrival, carrying the Blood Ravens away to whatever battle awaited them next. Haidar and Kai stood in the smouldering ruins of what had once been the oasis of Karan, surrounded by the ashes of corruption and the lingering smell of purifying flame. "Father, what do we do now?" Kai asked, his voice small in the sudden silence. Haidar looked at his son, seeing in the boy's eyes the same mixture of awe and terror that he himself felt. "We do as the Lord commanded. We go to Canyon's Edge and report what we have seen. And we remember, my son. We remember that even in the darkest hour, the Emperor's light can drive back the shadows." They retrieved their sandstriders and cart from where they had left them outside the settlement, the great beasts having somehow survived the chaos unharmed. As they prepared to leave, Haidar took one last look at the ruins of Karan. The corrupted buildings were still burning, the flames consuming every trace of the blasphemous symbols and twisted vegetation. Soon, nothing would remain but clean ash and the memory of what had transpired here. The journey to Canyon's Edge took them through some of the most desolate terrain on Calderis. The twin suns beat down mercilessly, and the desert wind carried the scent of distant fires. But Haidar found that he no longer feared the emptiness of the wasteland. He had seen true evil, and he had witnessed the Emperor's answer to it. The desert might be harsh, but it was clean in its harshness, honest in its dangers. "Tell me about the blood ravens, father," Kai said as they traveled. "The old stories don't say much about them." Haidar considered his words carefully. "They are the Emperor's chosen, my son. Warriors beyond mortal comprehension, created to fight battles that ordinary men cannot win. They are scholars as well as soldiers, seeking knowledge as a weapon against the darkness. Will we see them again? Perhaps, perhaps not. Their paths are not ours to know, but knowing they exist, knowing they watch over us, that is enough." Haidar's hand touched the place where his wound was beginning to heal. "The Emperor protects, Kai. Never forget that." Canyon's Edge was a small imperial outpost built into the red rock walls of a deep canyon. The Gothic architecture was immediately recognizable, with its pointed arches and flying buttresses, its walls covered in high Gothic script that proclaimed the Emperor's glory. The Aquila, the double-headed eagle that was the symbol of the Imperium, dominated the main entrance, its wings spread wide in eternal vigilance. The outpost was garrisoned by men and women of the Imperial Guard, their tan uniforms practical and well-maintained. They carried lasguns, weapons that were ancient by the standards of the Greater Imperium, but were beyond the height of technology on a feudal world like Calderis. Their sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Corvus, greeted Haidar and Kai with a weary tone. "Trader Haidar, we've been expecting you. The blood raven sent word ahead. The preacher wants to see you immediately." The preacher was a tall, gaunt man in the robes of the ecclesiarchy, the Imperium's official church. His staff was topped with the aquila, and his face bore the marks of absolute faith. When he spoke, his voice carried the fervor of one who had devoted his life to the Emperor's service. "I am Preacher Lenordi, servant of the Emperor and shepherd of souls. You have been touched by corruption, but the Emperor's grace has preserved you. Tell me everything you witnessed." Haidar recounted the events at the oasis of Karan, leaving out no detail. The preacher listened intently, occasionally asking questions or making notes on parchment. When the tale was finished, he sat back with a troubled expression. "The corruption spreads faster than we anticipated. Other settlements have reported similar signs. The ancient evil stirs once more, seeking to reclaim what was once purged." Preacher Lenordi's eyes burned with righteous anger. "The blood ravens have been informed, and they will do what must be done." "What of us, my lord?" Haidar asked. "Are we free to continue our trade?" "You are, but with conditions. You will carry blessed amulets to protect against corruption. You will report any signs of taint immediately, and you will serve as the Emperor's eyes and ears in the desert. The common people trust you, trader. They will speak to you of things they might hide from imperial officials." The preacher produced 2 medallions from his robes, each bearing the aquila and inscribed with prayers in high Gothic. "Wear these always. They will provide some protection against the whispers of the dark." Haidar accepted the medallions gratefully, placing one around his neck and giving the other to Kai. The metal felt warm against his skin, and he could sense the protective power within them. "Father, what about our trade goods? Our route?" Kai asked practically. "The old routes are no longer safe," Sergeant Corvus interjected. "Several settlements have gone dark. We're establishing new patrol routes, but it will take time. You may need to find new customers." "The Emperor provides," Haidar replied. They spent several days at Canyon's Edge, allowing the medical staff to monitor Haidar for any signs of recurring corruption. The tests involved prayers and incense as much as medical instruments. The line between faith and science blurred in the Imperium's approach to combating chaos. During their stay, Haidar learned more about the spreading corruption. The reports spoke of entire settlements disappearing overnight, their inhabitants vanishing without a trace. Other communities had been found transformed, their people changed into things that were no longer human. The pattern was clear. Something was orchestrating these attacks, some intelligence that sought to corrupt the entire world. "The Inquisition has been notified," Preacher Lenordi confided during one of their conversations. "They will come in time, but until then we must hold the line with what we have." If they were coming to Calderis, the situation was even more dire than he had imagined. On their final day at the outpost, a Vox transmission arrived from the Blood Ravens. The message was brief but chilling. 3 more settlements had been corrupted and purged. "We leave tomorrow," Haidar told his son that evening, "but not to resume our old route. We have a new purpose now." "What do you mean, father?" "We're going to map the corruption, track its spread. The Imperial forces need intelligence, and we're the only ones who know these deserts well enough to move safely between the settlements." Haidar's voice carried new resolve. "We've been chosen, Kai. Not in the way the Space Marines were chosen, but chosen nonetheless." The next morning, they set out into the desert once more. But this time, they carried more than trade goods. They bore the authority of the Imperium and the blessing of the Emperor. Their sandstriders seemed to sense the change in their mission, moving with increased purpose across the shifting sands. Their first destination was the settlement of Dust Haven, a small community built around a natural spring. If the corruption was spreading in the pattern the Imperial analysts suspected, Dust Haven would be the next target. Haidar hoped they would arrive in time to warn the inhabitants, or at least to gather intelligence about the enemy. The journey took them through territory that had once been familiar but now felt alien. The very air seemed changed, and the usual desert wildlife was nowhere to be seen. Even the hardy lizards and insects that normally populated the wasteland had fled or died. "Father, something's wrong with the sand," Kai observed on their second day out. "Look at the patterns." Haidar followed his son's gaze. The sand was indeed forming patterns, spirals and geometric shapes. They were similar to the symbols they had seen carved into the rocks, but these were being formed by the desert itself. "The corruption runs deeper than we thought," Haidar murmured. "It's not just affecting the settlements. It's changing the very land." They pressed on, but with increased caution. The protective amulets around their necks grew warm as they traveled, working to shield them from the worst effects of the spreading taint. But Haidar could feel the corruption pressing against his mind, whispering promises of power and pleasure. "Remember, boy," he told Kai, "faith is our shield. The Emperor protects those who remain pure of heart." "The Emperor protects," Kai replied, the ritual response giving him strength. By the third day, they could see the smoke of Dust Haven rising from the horizon. But it was the wrong kind of smoke, too black and oily to be coming from cooking fires or forge work. As they crested the final dune, the truth became apparent. Dust Haven was burning, but not from any natural fire. The flames were the purple-green of warp fire, and the smoke formed shapes. The settlement's buildings were intact, but they pulsed with the same energy they had seen at Karan. "We're too late," Kai whispered. "No," Haidar replied, his voice grim with determination. "We're exactly when we need to be. The Emperor has guided us here to witness this, to understand how the corruption spreads." They observed the settlement from a safe distance, noting the patterns of corruption and the movements of the transformed inhabitants. The information would be valuable to the Imperial forces, helping them understand the enemy's methods and perhaps find a way to stop the spread. But as they watched, Haidar became aware of something else. The corruption wasn't random. It was purposeful, orchestrated. Someone or something was directing the transformation of the settlements, gathering the corrupted humans for some greater purpose. "We need to get closer," he told his son. "But carefully. We need to see what they're doing." They approached Dust Haven under cover of a sandstorm, the swirling particles providing concealment from the twisted sentries that patrolled the settlement's perimeter. The inhabitants weren't just being transformed. They were being organized. The corruption wasn't just spreading randomly, it was building an army. "Father, look at the center of the settlement," Kai whispered urgently. At the heart of Dust Haven, where the community's meeting hall had once stood, a new structure was rising. It was built from materials that couldn't possibly exist in nature, substances that seemed to shift and flow like liquid while maintaining solid form. "A temple," Haidar breathed. "They're building a temple to the dark gods." "We have to warn the outpost," Haidar said urgently. They withdrew from Dust Haven as carefully as they had approached, but the knowledge they carried weighed heavily upon them. The journey back to Canyon's edge took on new urgency. Haidar pushed their sandstriders harder than he should, but the information they carried was too important to delay. Along the way, they encountered other signs of the spreading corruption. Oases turned to black pools, rock formations carved with blasphemous symbols, and the bones of creatures that had never walked under the natural suns of Calderis. The whole world is being changed, Kai observed as they traveled. How can we stop something this vast? We can't, Haidar replied honestly. But others can. The Emperor's servants have weapons and knowledge beyond our understanding. Our job is to provide them with the information they need. They arrived at Canyon's edge to find the outpost in a state of high alert. More refugees had arrived, survivors from settlements that had been attacked or simply abandoned in the face of the spreading corruption. Preacher Lenordi greeted them with barely contained urgency. Trader Haidar, thank the Emperor you've returned. The situation has deteriorated rapidly. We've lost contact with 7 more settlements, and the corruption is spreading faster than our worst projections. Haidar quickly briefed the preacher on what they had observed at Dust Haven, emphasizing the organized nature of the corruption and the construction of the temple. The preacher's face grew increasingly grave as he listened, but even as they spoke, new reports were arriving. The corruption was accelerating, with multiple settlements falling each day. The pattern was becoming clear. The enemy was gathering strength for a final assault. Father, we can't just sit here, Kai said privately. People are dying. Villages are being destroyed. What would you have us do, boy? We're traders, not warriors. We've done our part by bringing information to those who can use it. But even as he spoke, Haidar felt the inadequacy of his words. The Emperor had preserved them for a reason, and that reason might be more than just serving as messengers. The answer came the next morning, when a new figure arrived at Canyon's edge. She was tall and pale, wearing the black leather coat and broad-brimmed hat of an imperial agent. The rosette at her throat proclaimed her authority to all who knew its meaning. I am Interrogator Larkin of the Ordo Hereticus, she announced. I serve Inquisitor Bronson, who has been delayed by warp storms. In his absence, I am authorized to act with his full authority. The very air seemed to grow colder as she spoke. Interrogators were the trusted agents of the Inquisition, individuals who had proven their loyalty and competence beyond question. In the absence of a full Inquisitor, she wielded power that could reshape worlds. You are Haidar Marwan, the trader who has been mapping the corruption, she continued, her pale eyes fixing on him with uncomfortable intensity. Your reports have been most illuminating. I have a proposition for you. Haidar bowed as protocol demanded. I am at your service, my lady. The corruption is being coordinated from a central location. Our analysis suggests it's somewhere in the deep desert, in regions that only the most experienced desert guides know. You and your son are among the few who could navigate those wastelands and return with intelligence. Haidar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. You want us to find the source of the corruption. I want you to guide me to it, Interrogator Larkin corrected. I have the authority and the weapons to deal with whatever we find there, but I need someone who knows these lands as well as you do. My lady, with respect, my son is only 16. This sounds like a mission from which we might not return. Haidar's paternal instincts warred with his duty to the Imperium. The boy has already proven himself against the forces of chaos. And frankly, Trader Haidar, if we don't stop this corruption at its source, there will be no Calderis left for him to inherit. The interrogator's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The Emperor has preserved you both for this purpose. Kai stepped forward, his young face set with determination. I'll go, father. The Emperor protects, and we have a duty to serve. Haidar looked at his son, seeing not the boy he had been protecting, but the man he was becoming. The trials they had faced had forged something strong in Kai, something that would be needed in the dark times ahead. Very well, my lady. When do we leave? At dawn. We'll travel light and fast. The corruption is accelerating, which means whatever ritual they're preparing is reaching its climax. Interrogator Larkin's pale eyes seemed to burn with inner fire. Gather what supplies you need. We may be in the deep desert for weeks. That night, Haidar spent long hours preparing for the journey. He cleaned and blessed his scimitar, checked their water supplies, and made final adjustments to their equipment. But most importantly, he spent time in prayer, seeking the emperor's guidance for the trials ahead. Kai joined him in the small shrine that had been constructed within the outpost walls. The aquila above the altar seemed to watch over them as they knelt together, father and son united in faith and purpose. "Father, I'm scared," Kai admitted quietly. "Not of dying, but of changing. What if the corruption takes hold of us out there? Then we trust in the Emperor's protection and in the strength of our faith," Haidar replied. "The amulets will help, and the interrogator will have additional protections. But ultimately, our souls are in the Emperor's hands." "The Emperor protects," Kai murmured. "The Emperor protects," Haidar agreed. Dawn came with its usual harsh brightness, the twin suns rising over the canyon walls like the eyes of a judging god. Interrogator Larkin was waiting for them at the outpost's main gate, her equipment carefully organized. She carried a bolt pistol at her hip and a power sword across her back, weapons that represented the finest examples of Imperial technology. Her coat was lined with protective symbols, and her wide-brimmed hat bore a small shrine to the Emperor, complete with burning incense. "Are you ready?" she asked as they approached with their sandstriders and a heavily modified cart that carried only the most essential supplies. "As ready as we can be, my lady," Haidar replied. They set out into the desert, following routes that Haidar had learned from his father and grandfather. These were paths that didn't appear on any Imperial maps, ways through the wasteland that had been passed down through generations of desert dwellers. The first day's travel took them through relatively familiar territory. As they traveled deeper into the desert, on the second day, they encountered their first corrupted wildlife. A pack of desert wolves had been transformed into something that was no longer recognizably canine. Their fur had been replaced with grotesque boils, and their black eyes leaked milky yellow secretions. "Stay back," Interrogator Larkin commanded, drawing her bolt pistol. Mutated wolves attacked with ferocity, but the interrogator's weapons were more than equal to the challenge. Her bolt pistol spoke thunder, each shot exploding within the corrupted flesh of her targets. Those that survived the initial volley met their end on Haidar's scimitar and Kai's crossbow bolts. "Even the animals are being transformed," Haidar observed as they examined the corpses. "It's preparing for something," Interrogator Larkin said, her voice troubled. "This level of transformation requires enormous amounts of psychic energy. Someone is drawing power from the warp on a scale that shouldn't be possible on a world like this." They pressed on. On the third day, they encountered the first of the pilgrims. They were human, or had been once. They moved across the desert, hundreds of them, all heading in the same direction. "They're all going to the same place," Kai observed, "following some kind of call." "The source," Interrogator Larkin said with certainty. "They're being summoned to participate in whatever ritual is being prepared. We follow them, but at a distance." The pilgrims moved with tireless purpose, never stopping to rest or eat. Their corrupted forms seemed to draw sustenance from the tainted air itself. Haidar and his companions followed their trail. The landscape around them continued to change as they traveled. The sand gave way to rock formations that defied natural law, twisted spires, and impossible arches. "We're approaching the epicenter," Interrogator Larkin announced on the fourth day. "The corruption is so thick here that it's actually visible. Look at the way the light bends around those rock formations." She was right. The sunlight seemed to curve and twist as it passed through the air. The protective amulets around their necks were now hot to the touch, working constantly to shield them from the worst effects of the corruption. "Father, I can hear whispers," Kai said, his voice tight with strain. "Voices speaking in my mind." "Don't listen to them," Haidar commanded urgently. "Recite the litany of protection. Keep your mind focused on the Emperor's light." They all began to recite the ancient prayers, their voices joining together in a bulwark of faith against the encroaching darkness. On the fifth day, they crested a ridge and saw their destination spread out before them. It was a natural field of red rock, but it had been transformed into something that belonged in the deepest nightmares of humanity. The stone had been carved with symbols, and the air above the depression writhed with energy that made their eyes water. At the center stood a structure that defied description. It was part building, part organism, part pure energy made manifest. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched the beating of a vast heart, and its surface was covered with the same 8-pointed stars they had seen throughout their journey. A chaos temple, Interrogator Larkin breathed. But not just any temple. This is a gateway, a permanent tear in reality that allows the forces of the warp to pour through into our dimension. Around the temple, thousands of corrupted humans moved, their movements forming a vast ritual circle. At the center of the formation stood a figure that was clearly the leader. "We have to get closer," the interrogator said. "I need to identify the cult leader and assess the threat level." They descended under the cover of the swirling energy that made observation difficult. The corrupted humans seemed to be in some kind of trance, their attention focused entirely on the ritual they were performing. This allowed them to move relatively freely through the outer edges of the gathering. As they got closer to the center, the details became clearer. The cult leader was a figure of imposing stature, clearly once human, but now transformed by the gifts of the dark gods. His body was a fusion of flesh and metal, with mechanical appendages that sparked with unholy energy. His face was a mass of cables and organic matter, and his eyes burned with the fire of the warp. A dark Mechanicus cultist, Interrogator Larkin identified grimly. One of the tech priests who fell to chaos. That explains the scale of the corruption. He's been using technology to amplify the effects of the warp. "What's he trying to do?" Haidar asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "He's opening a permanent warp rift. If he succeeds, this entire sector could be consumed by chaos. Demon armies could pour through to attack Imperial worlds throughout the region. We have to stop him." "How?" "There are thousands of cultists, and we're just 3 people. The ritual requires precise timing and coordination. If we can disrupt it at the right moment, the backlash could destroy the entire gathering." Interrogator Larkin studied the movements of the cultists with the eye of an expert. But the timing has to be perfect. They spent hours observing the ritual, learning its patterns, and identifying the critical moments when intervention would be most effective. The corrupted humans moved in complex geometric patterns, their steps and gestures forming a vast mandala that focused psychic energy toward the temple at the center. There, the interrogator pointed to a particular formation of cultists. "Those are the primary conduits. They're channeling the energy from the outer circles to the inner sanctum. If we can eliminate them at the moment of peak power transfer, the ritual will collapse." "When?" Haidar asked. "Soon. The energy is building toward a crescendo. When the temple begins to glow with white light, that's our signal." Interrogator Larkin checked her weapons one final time. "Remember, our goal is not to fight them all. We strike fast, eliminate the conduits, and withdraw before they reorganize." The moments stretched like hours as they waited for the signal. The chanting of the cultists grew louder, more frenzied, and the air itself began to vibrate with barely contained power. The temple at the center pulsed faster, its rhythm matching the rising energy of the ritual. Then, as the first rays of dawn touched, the temple began to glow with brilliant white light. The moment had come. "Now!" Interrogator Larkin shouted, rising from concealment with her bolt pistol already firing. They struck like lightning. The interrogator's weapon spoke with the voice of righteous fury, each shot precisely placed to maximize disruption. Haidar's scimitar sang as it carved through corrupted flesh, the ancient blade somehow enhanced by the righteousness of his cause. Kai's crossbow thrummed as he stayed by his father's side, aiding his assault. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The carefully maintained patterns of the ritual collapsed as the primary conduits fell. The energy that had been building toward the temple suddenly had nowhere to go, and it turned back on itself with devastating force. The corrupted humans began to convulse as the uncontrolled warp energy tore through them. Some simply disintegrated, their bodies unable to contain the power that had been flowing through them. Others began to mutate at an accelerated rate, their forms becoming increasingly unstable. The dark Mechanicus cultist at the center of the ritual let out a roar of rage and frustration that shook the ground. He turned toward them, his mechanical limbs moving with inhuman speed, but it was too late. The ritual was broken, and the backlash was building toward an inevitable explosion. "Run!" Interrogator Larkin commanded, and they fled as the uncontrolled energy continued to build. Behind them, the temple began to crack and splinter as the warp energy it had been designed to channel turned destructive. The air itself seemed to tear, revealing glimpses of the hellish realm beyond. But without the ritual to stabilize it, the tear could not maintain itself. They reached the safety of the ridge just as the temple exploded in a pillar of hellish purple fire that reached toward the sky, the shockwave hitting everything for miles, and when it passed, nothing remained of the vast gathering but scattered ash and the lingering smell of brimstone. "Is it over?" Kai asked, his voice shaken by what they had witnessed. "This part of it," Interrogator Larkin replied, though her expression remained grim. "The immediate threat has been neutralized, but the corruption will take time to fade, and there may be other cells, other attempts to open warp rifts." They began the long journey back to Canyon's edge, traveling through a landscape that was slowly beginning to heal from the corruption that had claimed it. The black pools were clearing, the twisted rock formations were returning to more natural shapes, and the oppressive atmosphere was lifting. But the victory had come at a cost. The sheer scale of the corruption they had witnessed spoke to a larger threat, one that extended far beyond the borders of Calderis. The forces of chaos were moving in the galaxy, and this had been just one battle in a much larger war. "What happens now?" Haidar asked as they traveled. "Now we report to the Inquisition, and they decide what additional measures are needed," Interrogator Larkin replied. "The Blood Ravens will need to conduct additional purges, and the Administratum will need to establish new monitoring protocols." "And us? What of our future?" The interrogator studied him with those pale, penetrating eyes. "You've proven yourselves to be capable agents of the Emperor's will." Haidar felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. They had served the Emperor faithfully, but the price of that service was becoming clear. They were no longer simple traders moving goods between settlements. They had become something more, instruments of the Imperial will in a galaxy full of threats. When they finally reached the outpost, they found it buzzing with activity. Word of the explosion in the deep desert had reached the Imperial authorities, and preparations were underway for a full-scale investigation. The Blood Ravens had dispatched additional forces, and Inquisitor Bronson himself was expected to arrive within the week. Preacher Lenordi greeted them with obvious relief. "Thank the Emperor you've returned safely." The entire sector felt the psychic shockwave when the temple was destroyed. What exactly happened out there? Interrogator Larkin provided a detailed briefing, but Haidar found his attention drifting to the larger implications of what they had experienced. Calderis was just one world, and if the forces of chaos were making such coordinated attacks, what did that say about the state of the galaxy? "Father, do you think we'll ever go back to being simple traders?" Kai asked that evening as they rested in the quarters that had been provided for them. Haidar considered the question carefully. "I don't know, my son. The Emperor has shown us a different path, one that leads away from the simple life we once knew, but perhaps that's what was always meant to be." "I'm not sure I want to go back," Kai admitted. "What we did out there, stopping that ritual, saving who knows how many worlds from corruption, it felt important, more important than trading goods between settlements." "Then we follow where the Emperor leads," Haidar replied. The next morning brought news that would change their lives forever. Inquisitor Johnson had arrived ahead of schedule, and his first act was to request a private audience with Haidar and Kai. The Inquisitor was a tall, imposing figure, his eyes holding the weight of terrible knowledge. "You have served the Emperor well," he said without preamble. "Your actions in the deep desert prevented a catastrophe that could have consumed this entire sector. The Imperium owes you a debt that cannot easily be repaid." "We did our duty, my lord," Haidar replied humbly. "Nothing more." Inquisitor Bronson's eyebrows rose. "You tracked corruption across an entire world, survived direct contact with chaos cultists, and executed a precision strike that disrupted a major ritual. These are not the actions of simple traders." The Inquisitor began to pace. The Imperium faces threats on every front. The forces of chaos grow bolder, alien races press against our borders, and heresy flourishes in the shadows. We need individuals who can operate in hostile environments, who can blend in with local populations and who have proven their loyalty beyond question. Haidar felt his heart racing as he began to understand where this conversation was leading. You're offering us a position in the Inquisition. I'm offering you the chance to serve the Emperor in ways that few ever can. You would be my agents, my eyes and ears in the outer systems. You would travel to worlds where the Inquisition's presence might be unwelcome. You would investigate threats, gather intelligence, and when necessary, take direct action. And if we refuse, Kai asked, his voice steady despite his youth, then you return to your trading routes, with the Emperor's blessing and the thanks of the Imperium. There is no shame in choosing a simpler path. The Inquisitor's tone was neutral, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he already knew their answer. Haidar looked at his son, seeing the same determination that had carried them through their trials in the desert. What do you think, Kai? Kai paused in thought for a moment. If the Emperor has use for us, then we should answer his call. His voice carrying a conviction that made Haidar proud. Then it's settled, Inquisitor Bronson said with satisfaction. You'll undergo training, of course. There's much you need to learn about the threats facing the Imperium. But your natural talents and proven loyalty make you ideal candidates for the work ahead. And so began a new chapter in their lives. The simple traders who had once moved goods between desert settlements became agents of the Inquisition, serving the Emperor in ways they had never imagined.